Consider supporting Archaeosoup on Patreon for as little as $1 per month. Link available in video description. Thank you. Hello and welcome back to another Digging the Game. In this series we play computer games as archaeologists, and I have to say it is the middle of the night. I've got quite a sore throat, so I just keep on coughing and spluttering, can't stay asleep, so I thought I might as well be productive. And today I want to take a look at a game called the Stanley Parable, because this game is an excellent way of illustrating the value of archaeogaming, of playing computer games as archaeologists. I've actually made a brief note here to remind me to discuss this. Archaeology is primarily concerned with the relationship between aesthetic, structure, and meaning. I used to say that is primarily how we understand the past, is through the material things that we find and what they mean or meant, or what we think they meant at least. And this is where it gets interesting, because in so many ways today's computer game is precisely about that as well. Computer games are a chance to explore the relationship between these three elements in a sort of bounded way, represented with a man-made world, or a human-made world, woman-made world, which adheres to certain rules, and that we can examine in some respects very conventionally. For example, when we look at The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, we can look at the in-game history of that game from the perspective of an in-game, I suppose, denizen, an in-game avatar. We're able to sort of be a member of that world. I suppose in that sense we are subscribing to the system which we are presented with. But computer games can also help us to think about these systems in a slightly less bounded way. We're freer, as it were, to ask less obvious questions in a more obvious way, by acknowledging our relationship to the structure, the narrative, and indeed our role in that as unfolding. In some respects, I guess, computer games don't exist unless you play them, in the same way that the past doesn't exist unless you think about it, or unless you try to reconstruct it. And this, I think, is one of the great strengths of archaeogaming. It is a very obvious, or a much more obvious way of doing what archaeologists do all the time. And, well, here we are. The Stanley Parable. Indeed, we are told you are playing the Stanley Parable. And just to highlight this relationship between the player and the game, we are playing the game, but we are also seeing through the eyes of someone who's playing the game, who is seeing through the eyes of someone who's playing the game, and it repeats on and on into the distance there. This is a very clever game, and hopefully you're going to enjoy it as much as I do. So let's begin, shall we? The end is never, the end is never, the end is loading. Now, I have recommended this game actually to Andrew Reinhard, the archaeologist who we interviewed a couple of years ago now, about this field that he's essentially helping to create archaeogaming. And I suppose I got a bit overexcited in my recommendation, but he also seems to see this as a very useful tool for helping to express some of the things that he's been talking about as well. It's so interesting to play this as an archaeologist. Anyway.
This is the story of a man named Stanley. Stanley worked for a company in a big building where he was employee number 427. Employee number 427's job was simple. He sat at his desk in room 427 and he pushed buttons on a keyboard. Orders came to him through a monitor on his desk, telling him what buttons to push, how long to push them, and in what order. This is what employee 427 did every day of every month of every year. And although others
Sounds
might
like
have
a couple of
considered it
jobs I've heard
soul-eating, Stanley relished every moment that the orders came in, as though he had been made exactly for this job. And Stanley was happy. And then one day, something very peculiar happened. Something that would forever change Stanley. Something he would never quite forget. He had been at his desk for nearly an hour when he realized that not one single order had arrived on the monitor for him to follow. No one had showed up to give him instructions, call a meeting, or even say hi. Never in all his years at the company had this happened, this complete isolation. Something was very clearly wrong. Shocked, frozen solid, Stanley found himself unable to move for the longest time. But as he came to his wits and regained his senses, he got up from his desk and stepped out of his office.
Now, immediately, this is very clever. It's much cleverer than you might immediately think, in so much as what they're doing is they're explaining more or less what the experience of playing a computer game is. It is a response to stimulus. You push buttons in a given order for a certain duration and the game unfolds. And I remember thinking this back in the day when I was playing on my Mega Drive as a kid. Once we could control this game using nothing but button inputs on a computer, if you could just tell the program how to move Sonic across the screen and when to jump, would it even need to see what it was doing in order to succeed at that level? Now, as games get more complicated, the relationship between the stimulus and the button pressing becomes more complicated. But in this instance, it's quite a nice sort of simple metaphor for what I am about to do, and that is push buttons in response to stimuli. So off we go, as hinted by the narrator, out of the office.
All of his co-workers were gone. What could it mean? Stanley decided to go to the meeting room. Perhaps he had simply missed a memo.
Now, here we come up against...
No matter how hard Stanley looked, he couldn't find a trace of his co-workers.
Here we come up against the relationship between structure, interaction, and, in that sense, the reality of the story. This story will not progress unless I play this game. And in many respects, it kind of doesn't matter where I am. The aesthetics of the place are quite dull, quite bland, quite generic. What matters is how the space is being constructed through my actions. And this is about to be illustrated in a very elegant way.
When Stanley came to a set of 2 open doors, he entered the door on his left.
Now, do I? Do I have to? I could go along with the structure as it's being presented to me, or I could break away from that structure. So actually I'm going to choose to do that. Now,
this was not the correct way to the meeting room, and Stanley knew it perfectly well. Perhaps he wanted to stop by the employee lounge first, just to admire it.
Now, it in itself is in fact adhering to a structure. This game has been created by a third party, or rather by a team of people as a third party. And so in many respects, actually, my choices within this framework are entirely bounded. I cannot do something which is not part of the designed structure. And if I do go too far away from the structure, I will be encouraged to get back on track.
Ah, yes, truly a room worth admiring. It had really been worth the detour after all, just to spend a few moments here in this immaculate, beautifully constructed room. Stanley simply stood here, drinking it all in.
Beautiful.
But eager to get back to business, Stanley took the first open door on his left.
Did I? Do I? Will I? Now, I'll just take a moment as an archaeologist, as it were, to think about this. In so much as we often think about cultural norms and standards as being inescapable, especially when we try to, in a neat and tidy way, reconstruct elements of the past. We tend to think about people adhering or not adhering. about people as more or less actually as role players in a scenario, whereas actually it is entirely valid to say that people who are trying to break the rules are in fact doing so within the vocabulary of their society. A punk rocker, for example, has a crazy mohawk hairdo, but that's not that's not impossible within the rules of the society. It is simply a different path. So in some respects, we are all trapped by what some people might call our habitus, as it were. And in this instance, this is our habitus. And I'm about to try and break the rules. Off we go.
Stanley was so bad at following directions, it's incredible he wasn't fired years ago. Look, Stanley, I think perhaps we've gotten off on the wrong foot here. I'm not your enemy, really, I'm not. I realize that investing your trust in someone else can be difficult, but the fact is that the story has been about nothing but you all this time.
How reassuring.
There's someone you've been neglecting, Stanley. Someone you've forgotten about. Please, stop trying to make every decision by yourself. Now, I'm not asking for me, I'm asking for her.
Now, this is also important.
This is it, Stanley. Your chance to redeem yourself. To put your work aside. To let her back into your life. She's been waiting. That's her, Stanley. You need to be the one to do this. To reach out to her. If you can truly place your faith in another, then pick up the phone.
Sweetie, sorry to keep you waiting. I'm just pulling the bread out of the oven. All right. Okay, there we go. All right, now, I want you to come in and tell me all about your day.
Gotcha. Oh, come on. Did you actually think you had a loving wife who'd want to commit their life to you? I'm trying to make a point here, Stanley. I'm trying to get you to see something. Come inside. Let me show you what's really going on here.
And this is, again, one of the reasons why I love this game, is that it really highlights that actually you cannot escape the system in which you have been placed. Sooner or later, you will be forced back on track. Now, in a computer game, often that's done with invisible walls. Maybe you try and move outside of a beach area, or you try and swim into that infinite sea in the distance, and you'll be forced to turn around and come back. In so many ways, this is the same with society. It is the same with how we view ourselves within society, but also crucially, it is also the same with how we reconstruct the past as well. These are systems that we have created, and we are both subject to, and I suppose part of the form of that structure, untangling whether you create or you are being, I suppose, forced down a certain created path is quite difficult. So, for example, let's try and not go in the room, shall we?
Sorry, but you're in my story now.
Right. Okay.
This is a very sad story about the death of a man named Stanley.
Press 1, okay.
Stanley is quite a boring fellow. He has a job that demands nothing of him, and every button that he pushes is a reminder of the inconsequential nature of his existence.
See, now I am literally being reduced to someone who is reacting to stimuli, pushing buttons, so...
Look at him there, pushing buttons, doing exactly what he's told to do. Now he's pushing a button. Now he's eating lunch. Now he's going home. Now he's coming back to work. One might even feel sorry for him, except that he's chosen this life. But in his mind, in his mind he can go on fantastic adventures. From behind his desk, Stanley dreamed of wild expeditions into the unknown, fantastic discoveries of new lands. It was wonderful. And each day that he returned to work was a reminder that none of it would ever happen to him.
Press G to watch TV. Okay. I'll press H. I'll press E. I'll press space. No, I can only press G.
And so he began to fantasize about his own job. First, he imagined that one day while at work, he stepped up from his desk to realize that all of his co-workers, his boss, everyone in the building had suddenly vanished off the face of the earth. The thought excited him terribly.
So, before I press Q to spend time with the boys, it's also worth commenting on the fact that here we're currently having essentially the premise laid out for us. We are being told, as it were, I suppose, the history, a written form of history, almost a verbal form of history of this realm, the rules of the realm in which we are. But again, it's worthwhile reflecting upon the fact that this only exists within this creation that I am currently passing through. There's nothing that outside this computer game that dictates that any of this is real, has happened or will happen or has to happen. But by partaking in it, it does unfold in the way that is prescribed. And in that sense, I can only press Q.
So he went further. He imagined that he came to two open doors and that he could go through either. At last, choice. It barely even mattered what lay behind each door. The mere thought that his decisions would mean something was almost too wonderful to behold.
Press R to prepare dinner. Okay.
As he wandered through this fantasy world, he began to fill it with many possible paths and destinations. Down one path lay an enormous round room with monitors and mind controls. And down another was a yellow line that weaved in many directions. And down another was a game with a baby. And he called it the Stanley Parable.
Press V.
It was such a wonderful fantasy, and so in his head he relived it again, and then again, and again, over and over, wishing beyond hope that it would never end, that he might always feel this free. Surely there's an answer down some new path, mustn't there be? Perhaps if he played just one more time.
Press 1 to tell your wife you love her.
But there is no answer. How could there possibly be? In reality, all he's doing is pushing the same buttons he always has. Nothing has changed. The longer he spends here, the more invested he gets, the more he forgets which life is the real one.
Press K to go to sleep.
And I'm trying to tell him this, that in this world he can never be anything but an observer, that as long as he remains here, he's slowly killing himself. But he won't listen to me. He won't stop. Here, watch this. Stanley, the next time the screen asks you to push a button, do not do it.
Now, in this instance, obviously, it would be nice not to push the button. But if I don't push the button, nothing will happen. In the same way that if I don't move the mouse, the computer game essentially ceases to be. And again, I love the way that this is a wonderful, fairly obvious but fairly elegant way of helping you to think about this. The same goes, I suppose, for conscious experience. In many respects, the nature of as it were, inhabited bodies and realities, but also as well, the past. If we're not thinking about it, it kind of isn't there. In so much as our search for truth, absolute structure and answer as to what has happened previously on this planet, we cannot know. And so what we're doing is we are feeding ourselves stories and narratives. Stories and narratives based on very good evidence, but ultimately bounded by certain rules. And many of these rules we're not actually party to. For example, the subtleties of actually what it was to be a Roman. Well, we're sort of making a lot of that up. It's been written down by certain historians what it was to be a Roman from their perspective, for example. And archaeology reveals what it was like to be a Roman or alive in what we call the Roman period in parts of Britain, with pottery and this kind of thing, for example. But ultimately, it's impossible to escape the fact that these are structured things that we are creating. In the same way, it's impossible for me to escape the fact that I kind of have to press 8 in order for this to continue. Otherwise, it simply ceases to be. It doesn't exist as an experience. So, press 8.
You see? Can he just not hear me? How can I tell him in a way that he'll understand that every second he remains here, he's electing to kill himself? How can I get him to see what I see? How can I make him look at himself?
Press 5 to question nothing. In a very conscious way.
I suppose I can't. Not in the way I want him to. But I don't make the rules. I simply play to my intended purpose, the same as Stanley. We're not so different, I suppose. I'll try once more to convey all this to him. I'm compelled to. I must. Perhaps, well, maybe this time he'll see. Maybe this time. And I tried again, and Stanley pushed a button. And I tried again, and Stanley pushed a button. And
Here, again, we have the relationship between structure and player, or experiencer, being laid out. The narrator cannot do his job unless I'm doing my job. It's just wonderful. And in that sense, I love the way that we are, in an enjoyable way, being invited to examine structure. I'm sure French philosophers of the 20th century would absolutely love this game.
Stanley knew the office layout like the back of his hand. It was only a matter of time before he found the others, wherever they were.
Wherever they
Just
were.
a matter of time.
Where might they be? Just a matter of time. It's inevitable. So, very familiar, and...
When Stanley came to a set of 2 open doors, he entered the door on his left.
Shall we? Okay. Now, I don't want to in any way spoil this game in its entirety, in so much as there are various things you can do through the door on the right, and there are various things you can do through the door on the left. So don't worry, if you get this, and it's only $9.99 on Steam, there's an awful lot more to discover. Anyway.
Yet there was not a single person here either.
Tips for not getting
Feeling a
fired.
wave of disbelief, Stanley decided to go up to his boss's office, hoping he might find an answer there.
So I'm being compliant with the narration. I am fitting into the intended structure and narrative, and therefore, well, a certain way will unfold, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the way. And again, it's one of those things where by do not alter without consulting Whiteboard Manager. By doing what I suppose is expected, you're not necessarily doing the only thing that is possible. It sort of reminds me a little bit of people, the old sort of adage that people used to say, if you look for something in archaeology, then you will find it. In some respects, for example, if you're looking for a Roman villa in a field, you're biasing the outcome of the archaeology that comes out of the ground. And it's true, not every identified Roman villa is in fact a Roman villa. I keep on using the Romans as an example, but they are a good example because actually the Romans are one of the are a time period in Britain especially, but also actually frankly across Europe, which is almost outside of, in many respects, conventional history. Their form of history was much more like gossip, much more like a good story than it was what we would consider to be responsible, written down, balanced even perspectives on the past. And yes, actually we are for the most part quite happy to take what the Romans said about themselves, and also what they left behind as somehow an easy to understand and easy to read structure. So of course it unfolds in many respects as we expect it to, because we are forming the shape that it takes, if you see what I mean. So this is the path of least resistance through this game, doing what the narrator asks, but it's not the only path. I shall highlight that. For example, here's a broom closet.
Stanley stepped into the broom closet, but there was nothing here, so he turned around and got back on track.
I've been told there's nothing here. Is there nothing here? Does that mean there's nothing here?
There was nothing here. No choice to make, no path to follow, just an empty broom closet. No reason to still be here.
But does that make it any less of an experience than the rest of the game? Just because I'm being told that there's no reason to be here doesn't mean that
It
this
was
is any...
baffling that Stanley was still just sitting in the broom closet. He wasn't even doing anything. At least if there was something to interact with, he'd be justified in some way. As it is, he's literally just standing there doing sweet FA.
And that's precisely my point. We think about, for example, computer games...
Really still in the broom closet? Standing around doing nothing? Why? Please offer me some explanation here. I'm genuinely confused.
What makes standing in the broom closet different to playing the rest of the game is the fact that we're being told that this is a waste of time. But in many respects, this is part of the story.
There's no choice or anything in here, right? If I'd said Stanley walked past the broom closet, at least you would have had a reason for exploring it to find out. But it didn't even occur to me, because literally this closet is of absolutely no significance to the story whatsoever. I never would have thought to mention it.
It's just wonderful. It really is. And so in some respects, this experience, society, various elements of how we construct archaeology, it's all about really what you're looking at. It becomes through the...
Coming to a staircase, Stanley walked upstairs to his boss's office.
Up or down, up or down. Let's go with the path of least resistance. I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to spoil everything, so here we go. Now, these doors here, they do open on subsequent playthroughs. As you've already seen, you are encouraged during this game to restart and restart, and every time you restart, other things become, well, more possible, as it were. Anyway, into the office.
Stepping into his manager's office, Stanley was once again stunned to discover not an indication of any human life. Shocked, unraveled, Stanley wondered in disbelief who orchestrated this, what dark secret was being held from him. What he could not have known was that the keypad behind the boss's desk guarded the terrible truth that his boss had been keeping from him. And so the boss had assigned it an extra secret PIN number, 2845. But of course, Stanley couldn't possibly have known this.
Now, I really like the way
Stanley just sat around twiddling his thumbs. Trying to input anything on the device was useless, since he could never possibly know that the combination was 2845.
I really like the way that this highlights the relationship, again, between design, experience, and, in that sense...
2845.
The unfolding story. There is no way for us to know that, and yet there is, because we've been told that that is what the keypad is. Within the logic of experiencing the game as a I suppose in-game avatar, we couldn't possibly know.
But it turns out that the panel's emergency override kicked in, and the door just opened all by itself, and Stanley got the hell along with the story. Well, whoop-de-doo.
And yet again, there is very little I can do to actually change what the designers of the game intended. You could push those buttons, and essentially what just happened would happen. The window shutters will come down, and the door opens there with the fireplace disappearing. I was going to try playing the piano. Will that work? No. Oh well. Anyway. Now here, I become very conscious of the fact that there's a button on the wall, and all I can do is push it. Again, it's interesting how playing the game makes you more conscious of that. It is a choke point in terms of the narrative and the design. That's uncomfortably obvious after a while.
Descending deeper into the building, Stanley realized he felt a bit peculiar. It was a stirring of emotion in his chest, as though he felt more free to think for himself, to question the nature of his job. Why did he feel this now, when for years it had never occurred to him? This question would not go unanswered for long. Stanley walked straight ahead through the large door that read Mind Control Facility.
Now here we have a choice, or do we? Now I'm not going to go down there, but needless to say, you can go down there. It says escape. It's very reminiscent of Portal 2, for example, if any of you ever played that. The way in which the story unfolds, as it were. Well, what can we do except...
The lights rose on an enormous room packed with television screens. What horrible secret did this place hold? Stanley thought to himself. Did he have the strength to find out?
So, stimulus and... oh, a button.
Now the monitors jumped to life, their true nature revealed. Each bore the number of an employee in the building, Stanley's co-workers. The lives of so many individuals reduced to images on a screen, and Stanley, one of them, eternally monitored in this place where freedom meant nothing.
This place where freedom meant nothing. Again, in the context of what we've been talking about, that's an interesting statement. Am I free to do what I want? Are any of us? And as archaeologists, are we? Are we free to say what we want about the past? What's the morals, the ethics, and the reality of trying to do that?
This mind control facility, it was too horrible to believe. It couldn't be true. Had Stanley really been under someone's control all this time? Was this the only reason he was happy with his boring job? That his emotions had been manipulated to accept it blindly?
The relationship in that sense as well between the computer game player and the computer game.
No, he refused to believe it. He couldn't accept it. His own life in someone else's control? Never. It was unthinkable, wasn't it? Was it even possible? Had he truly spent his entire life utterly blind to the world? But here was the proof. The heart of the operation. Controls labeled with emotions. Happy, or sad, or content. Walking, eating, working. All of it monitored and commanded from this very place. And as the cold reality of his past began to sink in, Stanley decided that this machinery would never again exert its terrible power over another human life. For he would dismantle the controls once and for all.
Let's do that, shall we? Let's dismantle the controls once and for all. Mind controls idle, awaiting input. Although, hang on. If we do what we are asked to do, are we not, in fact, subject to the mind control device, which is the computer game? If I say off, I'm doing what I've been told to do. So I suppose I should turn it on.
Oh, Stanley, you didn't just activate the controls, did you?
Yes,
After they kept you enslaved all these years, you go and you try to take control of the machine for yourself. Is that what you wanted? Control? Oh, Stanley, I applaud your effort, I really do. But you need to understand, there's only so much that machine can do. You were supposed to let it go, turn the controls off, and leave. If you want to throw my story off track, you're going to have to do much better than that. I'm afraid you don't have nearly the power you think you do. For example, and I believe you'll find this pertinent, Stanley suddenly realized he had just initiated the network's emergency detonation system. In the event that this machine is activated without proper DNA identification, nuclear detonators are said to explode, eliminating the entire complex. How long until detonation then? Let's say 2 minutes. Now this is making things a little more fun, isn't it, Stanley? It's your time to shine. You are the star. It's your story now. Shape it to your heart's desires. Oh, this is much better than what I had in mind. What a shame we have so little time left to enjoy it. Mere moments until the bomb goes off. But what precious moments each one of them is. More time to talk about you, about me, where we're going. What all this means, I barely know where to start. What's that?
Pushing buttons.
You'd like to know where your co-workers are? A moment of solace before you're obliterated? All right, I'm in a good mood. You're gonna die anyway. I'll tell you exactly what happened to them. I erased them. I turned off the machine. I set you free.
Blimey.
Of course, that was merely in this instance of the story. Sometimes when I tell it, I simply let you sit there in your office forever, pushing buttons endlessly and then dying alone. Other times, I let the office sink into the ground, swallowing everyone inside, or I let it burn to a crisp. I have to say this, though, this version of events has been rather amusing.
Correct.
Watching you try to make sense of everything and take back the control wrested away from you, it's quite rich. I just hate to see it go. But I'm sure whatever I come up with on the next go-around will be even better. My goodness, only 34 seconds left. But I'm enjoying this so much. You know what? To hell with it. I'm going to put some extra time on the clock, why not? These are precious additional seconds, Stanley. Time doesn't grow on trees. Oh dear me, what's the matter, Stanley? Is it that you have no idea where you're going or what you're supposed to be doing right now? Or did you just assume when you saw that timer that something in this room was capable of turning it on? I mean, look at you. Running from button to button, screen to screen, clicking on every little thing in this room. These numbered buttons, no, these colored ones. Or maybe this big red button, or this door. Everything, anything, something here will save me. Why would you think that, Stanley? That this video game can be beaten? Won?
Because
sold?
that's part of the convention of a video game,
Do you
isn't
have
it?
any idea what your purpose in this place is? Stanley, you're in for quite a disappointment. But here's a spoiler for you. That timer isn't a catalyst to keep the action moving along. It's just seconds ticking away to your death. You're only still playing instead of watching a cutscene because I want to watch you for every moment that you're powerless. To see you made humble. This is not a challenge. It's a tragedy. You wanted to control this world, that's fine. But I'm going to destroy it first, so you can't.
30 seconds.
Take a look at the clock, Stanley. That's 30 seconds you have left to struggle. 30 seconds until a big boom and then nothing. No ending here, just you being blown to pieces. Will you cling desperately to your frail life, or will you let it go peacefully? Another choice. Make it count, or don't. It's all the same to me, all a part of the joke. And believe me, I will be laughing at every second of your inevitable life from the moment we fade in until the moment I say, happily ever up.
Ultimately, again, all my actions are bounded within a system, and if the system wants me to go in certain directions in this instance, I can only ever go there. And even being aware of the structure itself doesn't necessarily give you freedom, which is one of the most frustrating parts of almost any endeavour, any creative endeavour, any scientific endeavour. There's this idea, for example, of the fishbowl universe. Can we ever actually get outside our own perspective and actually understand objective reality? Can we understand objective history as well? I love this game, I really do.
Stanley decided to go to the meeting room to check on his co-workers. He never functioned well by himself and constantly needed support and guidance from others, so the thought of total solitude was terrifying to him.
Okay.
When Stanley came to a set of 2 open doors, he entered the door on his left.
And I think we should leave it there. I think I've certainly somewhat made my point. I think the game's made its point, but also, as I say, I really don't want to spoil any more of this game. You simply have to try it for yourself. Incidentally, as always, I've been playing using my lovely mouse pointers, archaeology themed mouse pointers. In this instance, you have a stone tool arrow. Check out the link on the YouTube channel for more on how you can get hold of your own for free. But little plug there, plug for giveaway, I suppose. But more than that, I think this is what gets me so excited about playing computer games as an archaeologist, but also, frankly, archaeology itself. This has been, I suppose, my way of trying to partly, I suppose, legitimize playing computer games as an archaeologist, but also actually it helps to communicate why it is that I adore doing archaeology. I often talk about how the past represents a whole host of infinitely variable case studies on how humans do humanity, on the different choices that we make, arbitrary as they are, but also in many ways bounded as they are within certain limitations. The past is unknowable, but it is also in many ways structured. What it is to be a humanity, to be humanity itself, so to be a human being, is in many ways indefinable. Not quite sure which one is the right word there, but also it is as well structured and bounded. So we can say certain things, certain truisms, as it were, about what it is to be a person in the past. But we need to acknowledge that we can only do that because we are doing it from the standpoint of being within a constructed system and situation and perspective on the past. We are not all-powerful. We are not capable of everything. In the same way, the narrator needs the story, the player for the story to unfold. Well, we are playing our role when we are being an archaeologist looking at the past. We are not somehow outside that truth, as it were, looking in. We are part of that truth, and therefore we have an effect on it. We alter it, and well, we possibly even make it less true. But that's the only way we can do it, and that's why I love this game. Yeah. Seriously, guys, you definitely should give it a go. Try other options, go down other corridors, press buttons, do everything you possibly can in this game, and you will find all sorts of coolness. For example, there is an in-game museum of the game, where the game developers walk you through different instances of the designs within the game. Even actually the structure of the museum itself is itself a sort of a fairly witty criticism and play on the layout of a museum. So it's wonderful, and hopefully this has been interesting for you. If you've been wondering about this question of playing computer games and archaeology, how they relate to each other, well, in some instances, as I said at the beginning of the video, it is very literal. We are looking at the in-game history, and we are using visual cues and historical cues that an archaeologist uses in the real world, but within the computer game world. But in other ways, in other instances, in a much more profound way, computer games offer a chance to do this, what we've just been doing here, analysing structure and form and design and our relationship to it, since we are ourselves, as it were, subject to structure, form, design, aesthetic, so on and so forth. I love it. Anyway, guys, as I say, it's the middle of the night. In fact, it is just gone 3 a.m. and I think my throat has calmed down. I may well go and get some sleep now. As ever, until next time, do take care. Bye-bye.